E te iwi no mai hoki mai. Very shortly, we are going to be joined by 5 government ministers who form part of the group of ministers working together on family violence and sexual violence. Really looking forward to welcoming them here today and hearing their kōrero, which is going to go for an hour. Charles, what did you think of that last session? There was some pretty...
Sure. I mean, we're tapping away at the agenda here, but I could hear the panel talking, and I was just really taken back by Levar. The first time that I've heard of this organisation, and my heart goes out to them. What an incredible piece of mahi that they're doing within our Pasifika communities there, and I've actually just added them on Instagram here. Levar Pasifika, I encourage you to have a look at their Instagram page. Obviously, someone really onto it is taking care of their media as well. But they ask questions like, "Do you know the migration story of your Pasifika ancestors?" And I mean, what a grounding question to be asking people, and to run through that, a really important question. Then, of course, they're asking, "Do you know what your rights are in a relationship?" And then one here, what is the VAR? And if you don't mind, I'll just quickly run through this. What is the VAR? The VAR means the space. It is the space that relates and connects. There is a VAR between people and the environment, ancestors and the heavens, which is awesome. For Pasifika, nurturing the VAR between people is important, and you can find out more information at www.atumai.nz. That's the VAR. But again, I was really impressed with their work.
Thank you. I'm definitely going to go and check them out when I can on social media as well. I really enjoyed hearing about the father's whānau. I just found that very wonderful to hear that. So a big mahi to you for that. I believe we're about to go into our next panel, our next kōrero, where we are joined by the 5 government ministers who work together in a group on family violence and sexual violence. The agencies are responsible for implementing the Aorerekura and the action plan. Ka pai. So I'll just give you a little bit of more idea on what that panel is going to be like. It will be moderated by Ange Jury, who is the Chief Executive of the National Collective of Independent Women's Refuges. E te Aorerekura ngā mihi. Please note that we do have apologies today from Minister Willie Jackson, who unfortunately is unwell. So let's just take a moment to send him some whakaaro, piki te ora, matua. Hopefully you get well soon. I think we've also have Andrew Kibblewhite, Chief Executive of the Ministry of Justice, sitting in on this session. We're not quite ready to start, so
no, we're just waiting for people to connect now. And as you can imagine, when we have ministers that are due to join us, their schedules are changing all the time. In fact, in the last couple of minutes, yesterday we had apologies from Minister Allan, I think it is Kiri Allan, and she's just come back to say that she's able to join us. So I mean, that's awesome. We're just trying to get linked in now with them. So there's a lot of work happening in the background, our people talking to their people, and we're just trying to get them linked in and making sure that we're all ready to go. But,
which I imagine is indicative of the actual reality of the mahi that they're doing. You know, having ministers working together, bringing their portfolios together for a kaupapa that is as important as this in our society is just, it's so important, isn't it? And I know for me, this whole kaupapa has really made me way more interested in what is going on in Parliament, if you know what I mean, like way more like I really need to understand this better because, it's just very encouraging that finally this kaupapa is being taken seriously and we've actually have all this wonderful collaboration going on. And so, it's very exciting when you think about where this is going to go in the short-term future, but also in the long-term future.
Definitely, I can say that we're all used to reading documents, we're all used to reading strategy, and we all understand the machinery of government. But I think one thing that I've taken away from both yesterday and today is the passion that is conveying a lot of the strategy. It really is the fuel behind a lot of the thought and the mahi out there. It's that passion that you can hear and you can feel. It is just really, really inspiring.
Total, Charles. And then I was reflecting yesterday on how what we're seeing in this space is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of who we know is out there, like everybody who is tuned in and watching, and those who are actually out there in the field too busy working to even be able to tune in. And so just once again, a big mihi to you all out there for this very important mahi that you have all been led to do in your lives for our communities. Thank you so much. Ka pai. So I believe we are now ready to go into this next session with the ministers. Settle in whānau. We have it scheduled for a whole hour, and we hope that you enjoy. Remember, you can use the chat to send some whakaaro through. Ange, over to you to get us started.
And it's great to actually be here with this group of wonderful wahi, and awesome that you're able to join us, Minister Allan, after we didn't think you were going to be here. Our last panel member has just arrived. Over here. Oh. And I thought the best way that we could start, first off, I need to let everyone know that Minister Allan might have to disappear if her bill is called in the House. So if she exits stage right, that's what that's about. And also Minister Sepuloni has to leave at 11:15, so she will exit stage left. We're going to try and have a relatively relaxed sort of a conversation, because I think you probably want to hear what it is that ministers actually think about some of this work, some of this mahi that they're doing. I think the first thing we could do, though, is give everyone a very brief, politicians, just a very brief chance to introduce yourselves, so that everyone out there knows who you are and why you think maybe that this is an important chance to talk about this mahi. Start with you, Mr. Radhakrishnan.
All right. We keep the masks on
when you talk.
Yeah. Okay. Kia ora koutou. Kia ora Ange, lovely to see you again as well. Great to be here. I'm Priyanka Radhakrishnan, and I'm the Associate Minister for Social Development and Employment, and part of my delegations includes what MSD does in terms of family and sexual violence prevention. Also the Minister for Diversity, Inclusion and Ethnic Communities, amongst others. Great to be here. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou, tuatahi me tuku mi kai a koe te Aorerekura ai te honore marama mō tana mahi ki te whakapua wai ki te tautoko tō tātou nei whānau ngā hapori katoa I rori te maru o tēnei kaupapa whakahirehire ki a tātou ngai iwi Maori, ngai iwi katoa o Aotearoa. Hioi, kia ora, my name is Kiri Allan. I just want to acknowledge Ange and our Aorerekura, our staunch sister here, Marama, who's been at the helm leading this mahi. I want to also acknowledge my colleagues, Minister Sepuloni, Minister Aupito, and Minister Radhakrishnan, who as well, we all hold various respective roles to, I guess, tiaki our whānau from these positions that we sit. So I'm from the mighty East Coast, and I'm the Minister for Justice. Tēnā koutou.
Kia ora tātou katoa, nei rā te uri o te tai tōkero, te tai rāwhiti, te rarawanga puhinga te parau. Kia ora, Marama Davidson, and alongside being Minister for the Prevention of Family Violence, Sexual Violence, also Associate Minister in Housing and Homelessness. Very strong and obvious connections, of course, between those two portfolios as well. Pretty honoured to be here. As I've said consistently over the hui and in my community kōrero out there, our ministers are very clear that we want to do this work, that we know there's a lot to fix, a lot to resolve, that we are committed to collectively working together to commit to Te Aorerekura. So lovely to be here with all of these amazing ministers, and those ministers who you know are also not here physically in this room, but who continue to work really closely with all of us and with me collectively as well. Kia ora.
Salve everyone. I am Carmel Sepuloni. I am the Minister for Social Development and Employment, ACC, Arts, Culture and Heritage, which doesn't have as much to do with this kaupapa. And really sitting here more with my ACC hat on. I work closely with the joint venture, but particularly Minister Radhakrishnan, who's the Associate Minister for Social Development, and she wears the hat more for anything in relation to this kaupapa from the Ministry for Social Development side of things. And just acknowledging our sister here, Marama, and the role that she plays with leading the joint venture in her ministerial capacity. And it has been an amazing journey for the last 5 years, but particularly this term, with respect to being able to come together as ministers in charge of different government agencies to ensure that we are taking this cross-government approach to this, and acknowledging all of you, acknowledging you, Ange, for the important work that you do and the work that you do alongside us with respect to this. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Good morning, Te Alofa. I'm Aupito. I'm the Minister for Māngere, Gateway to the Nation, land gifted and but I'm the Minister for Pacific Peoples, Minister for Courts, Associate Minister for Foreign Affairs, Associate Minister for Education Pacifica, Associate Minister of Justice, and Associate Minister for Health Pacifica. Those portfolios give me a line of sight across a number of key agencies where my work is about lifting Pacific well-being. And of course, what that says is our approach as a community and as a people, and certainly from our cultural lens of this government, is that the silo operations of government doesn't help our communities to address really challenging issues. And the issue of family violence and sexual violence is a scourge on our communities. And in the past several years since I became the Minister for Pacific Peoples, the focus has been about the strength of our Pacifica community. But we've also got to recognize that in this space, sexual violence, family violence, that has the potential to pull down those strengths and really do irreparable harm, and mentally, psychologically. It is a challenge on our communities because nobody likes to talk about family violence and sexual violence. It's a challenge in the sense that it's sort of left to the side and not spoken of. But my call has been consistently to our church leaders, our family leaders, and our men that they must step up and take the lead. Begin to acknowledge that this is a health issue as well as a justice issue. And so I want to acknowledge Marama Davidson because it's not easy bringing together a number of organizations, but Te Aorerekura, that strategy actually commits everybody to work in that space. For Māori and been very, very supportive in that space. But I also know that many of our families, when they identify themselves, if they are Māori, Samoan, or Māori Tongan, etc., Māori is captured by the states or the agency and not so much the Pacifica context. And so I look to working closely with Marama and really appreciate Marama's leadership and empathy in this space. There's a lot going on in our communities to try and address it, but it does require consistent and determined resourcing because the communities have the answers. Government agencies do not have the monopoly on good ideas.
No.
And so often it's the communities that have simple and practical solutions that our role, I believe, as government is to wrap around support and resourcing that.
Kia ora, thank you. And that was actually really inspiring. That's like an encapsulation of the whole notion of this kaupapa, I think. Yeah. So now we ask some questions and give everyone a chance to talk about what it is that they want to do. And I'm most interested, and we've already just had an introduction into this, how do others talk about how you're ensuring this whole of government approach to this kaupapa? How are we actually doing this? And I'm wondering if you'd like to start with that, Marama.
Yeah, and I encourage any of our ministers to jump in with your own whakaaro in acknowledging, Ange, that you are one of the many examples of our leadership in the sector who continues to challenge government systems in exactly the right way. It's quite appropriate that we've got you sitting here with us. Just to let people know, so our group of collective ministers, we actually meet, it's about every couple of months. This morning's session is exactly the time that we had planned for our regular 2-monthly catch up. And I want to acknowledge, and I've heard this from the sector, having a minister, I know, has made a massive difference to being able to pull ministers together with that commitment to eliminating family violence, sexual violence. And I know that for the sector in terms of direct line of accountability, in terms of, as a minister, having a group of officials who are directly in engagement for specifically this issue has meant a lot. And so that is one of the ways that I know is foundational to improving and getting away from the siloed approach that we heard you all speak about yesterday. I wanted to talk about Te Puna Aonui, the board. Emma this morning spoke about the joint accountability also at our CE's level across all of our respective agencies. And when I said yesterday, was it, and Aupito just backed me up completely, affirmed what I said yesterday, thank goodness, that we all absolutely are on the same page about getting the resource and the authority, the mana back out to communities to lead this work. This is something that, again, we're all really, really clear on. Our CEs collectively are accountable to that. I wondered in this space, Minister Sepuloni, if you might also want to pick up on the social sector commission stuff a little, but it was just, I guess, to say, Te Puna Aonui, we've got a board that is collectively responsible. We've got a ministerial group that is collectively responsible. We meet regularly as a group. We also meet individually very regularly also, so that we can dive down into the respective agency work across public sector. And so that was just some of the things that I wanted to put up about working together. While we've got really awesome ministerial CE sort of collective commitment to the shifts in Te Aorerekura, we know that on the ground and out in the regions across the country that we've still got work to do. And we know that that's the challenge. So it's really important to know that at these levels, we've made these collective commitments and accountabilities.
Well, thanks, Minister Davidson. Minister Sepuloni, social sector commissioning, I've been rabbiting on about it for a while, is something I think is absolutely vital to this work. So I'm wondering if you'd be able to give people a little bit of a...
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we as ministers and you as members of the sector would be very cognizant of is that the way in which government contracts and funds is not conducive necessarily to having the types of integrated and wraparound supports that we need for whānau. It's also very ad hoc. Different government agencies do it in different ways. Some contracts and services that you might have are fully funded by government. Some are partially, and then you have to go out and find the funding somewhere else. And the decisions over the course of decades have really been made in a way where there was no real formula to it. and no real rationale for why those things may be the way that they are. And so we have been consulting over a period of years, really, to find out how we can do this better as a government, how we can work with the social sector better, and how we can get some consistency across the way, across government with respect to how we do social sector commissioning. One of the clear things that came out of the sector was that we needed to take a relational approach, and we need to take an approach that enables us to mobilise and leverage off the community level strengths and community organisations. And so we have a commitment now, which was formalised through Cabinet as well, that we will take that social sector commissioning approach, and that we will work to get some consistency across government agencies so that we can apply that approach. And important for the family violence and sexual violence sector, because it will enable us to be much more integrated with how we work with and for whānau. And so I think it's really exciting. There's lots to do here, but we'll just keep talking to make sure that we do this better than we've done it before.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add?
I might just jump in on the ICI response as well, Ange.
Next question.
Oh, is that the next question? Yeah. Oh, well, I'll wait for that then.
I might just add.
Sorry.
No, you go.
I just wanted to say, just listening to two of you speak as well, and as someone who's worked in the sector for many years before getting into Parliament, that was exactly what we were grappling with in terms of the fragmentation within government. And I think having Te Puna Aonui, one minister working with, it's really been quite a mammoth effort to try and turn or shift the way that government works, including government agencies. And I think, I just wanted to point that out and say that that's what many from the sector have been crying for, and I'm just incredibly proud.
Thank you.
And you should be. Which I'm probably going to go to you first with this next question. Given that you've already said you want to answer it, what work is currently underway to make sure people impacted by violence are able to receive integrated responses that meet the needs, their income, their housing, and alongside the long-term recovery and healing work?
Yeah.
Would you like to address that?
Yeah, and I suspect Minister Sepuloni will want to add to that in terms of the income and the broader piece of work that wraps around this, but particularly in terms of accessing services for family and sexual violence and also the long-term healing. We do have the integrated community response model. We know from evidence that when we have a collaborative model that is community-led, where agencies are working together to support whānau in a way that is holistic, that's what works. And we've been wanting to ensure that we keep strengthening that model. It is a shift in the way, it's really a shift in mindset, but it's also a shift in the way that government funds that to happen. And so, the fact that government funds NGOs to be part of that collaborative model to ensure that if someone's experiencing violence and needs support, you don't have to go and tell your story 10 times to different agencies. They're all part of that same group that is working collectively with that individual and their whānau. I think that is incredibly strong. There's also a specific action, I think it's action 2 in Te Aorerekura specifically, that looks at the more holistic and long-term healing and the role that ICI can play in that as well, that we're working towards. So I might leave it at that and just reflect to Minister Sepuloni as well.
No, I don't think, I'm quite happy to move on with questions. I think that you just answered that point.
And just acknowledging there's more work to be done there as well to make sure that everyone, regardless of where they live across the motu, gets that same access. So acknowledging that too. And
the importance of it being community-led.
Absolutely.
By a government agency, I think is absolutely critical.
I think COVID taught us a few lessons.
Yes.
And COVID taught us how it was a health response. And when people were confined in a space for a long period of time, things happened that they could be ashamed of and not be able to seek help from. And what we saw as we were building the thing, the structure, all of government structure, was a number of government agencies, MSD, health, housing and others, providing that support to Māori and Pacific health providers in particular to provide that response. The challenge for us as a government and as a community is we have to maintain that sort of approach.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that. COVID did teach us a lot. And I think we were already on this track, but it certainly helped to speed it up, and recognising that community does have the answers. And so, if we think about the COVID response, whether it be access to food because of hardship reasons, whether it be access to support from family violence, sexual violence services, what we had to do was to talk to those working in the sector and to say, what do you need to be able to respond effectively to these families? And then to get in behind and alongside you to make sure that that support was there. And so that's really an approach that we need to continue moving forward.
Can I totally agree?
One of the questions from the participants at yesterday's Q&A with me was exactly that question. I was asked, will government continue the high trust was the language specifically referred to. Will government continue the high trust responses that we saw through COVID? And I said, absolutely, those are the aspirations. And I did mention the social sector commissioning because that was when our sector groups, our NGOs felt that for the first time, in a way that they had been wanting for years, as Priyanka said, they really felt like they could do the work that they needed to do. And the challenge is how do we actually embed that across our agencies? Because that's not the default system right now. And I've been referring to it as we've also got to unclunk things.
Unplug. I like that word.
A very high level technical, but it's exactly what people were referring to. And so this discussion is really pinnacle to what people have been raising.
Can I just quickly add one thing to that? Because also as Minister for the Community and Voluntary Sector, we've been looking at how we do that in terms of grant funding that is applicable to many of our organisations as well, and the changes with the Charities Act. And that all of that really is towards both unclunking things, making it much easier for particularly smaller charities that many within this sector would be applicable in that sense, but equally also maintaining the trust and accountability that we need for the community sector to thrive in the eyes of the wider public as well. So just getting that balance right.
That's right. This is social sector commissioning.
Right.
It's going to be our biggest challenges, I think. Getting that work.
It is.
Minister Allan, before you run away, this next question's probably aimed mostly at you. Can you talk about what's being done to make sure that victims, survivors are heard and that they're informing changes to the sexual violence systems?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So I think Minister Davidson will be best placed to talk about the engagement you had to form the approach that we've come to. So but just to acknowledge those that did participate, I think we've got over 280 stories of people that have lived and breathed through the system, and I know that many will be participants as a part of this hui. So just to acknowledge that and thank you for the sharing and the insights that you provided to us as a government that's really wanting to change the way that we do things, because we know that our whānau that are caught up within the system more often than not have to endure layer upon layer upon layer of trauma as a consequence of being a survivor, being a participant. And so I think, this work that we're doing to ensure that it is our survivors, it is our people that have been in the system that are leading the way. You are the experts. And I think that's been probably the biggest takeaway that we can, that this piece of work's really put a spotlight on for me. From a response, though, in terms of how is the system operationalising that response, apart from making sure that we can store things online and learn collectively. Across the justice system, I think what we're trying to do is really have a victim-centred approach. You'll see through the budget, for those that were at all interested in that. But, you know, we set aside a real big chunk of cash to make sure that we have victims at the centre driving the way that we do things. There was just over $45 million that's been set aside for 4 years of work to enable the government to do our job better, to respond to the needs of those that have been impacted the most. I think we've also, I think, heard from communities across the board that have been calling for more wraparound as people go through the system. Yeah, like I said, I'm talking kind of from the system perspective, but and you know, things that have worked in community before and trying to upscale those things. I don't know if anyone's familiar with old Fire Michelle and the Auckland District Courts that you know, works alongside many whānau who have been through that system up there, but trying to replicate Fire Michelle's across the country and doing that through family court navigators, but making sure that we are leaning in and learning from the responses that whānau have on the ground. But and I think just probably coming back to the point that my colleague spoke about prior, you know, we're having these the cross collaborative approach from government, and as evidenced by, you know, Te Aonui and these the cross collaborations between ministers and agencies. I think there's an ongoing reference check for us, and I know that certainly amongst my own agency, this is always my driving question. I'm sure it's the same for my colleagues across the sector. You know, how does this directly impact the lives of those that need it the most? That becomes the fundamental driving question and drives the way that we respond. What are we hearing on the ground colloquially, and what are we seeing in terms of the changes across the system? Is this impacting the way that people's well-being as we go through? Chuck you on my other hat, which is Associate Minister of Finance, but part of my role there is to, one of the delegations that I've got is to look at the way our clustered approach. So it's really breaking through silos in terms of the way our ministries are working across the system. So like as my colleagues have said, so that you're not having to tell your story 1,000 different times, depending on which door you enter into. Part of my role there is really asking our cross-collaborative agencies, whether that's through cluster systems, whatnot, taking the experiences that our people have within the system, taking those experiences and having that to guide the way that we are being asked to account for every dollar spent across the system. Is this tangibly changing the lives of folks, or we're replicating 700? I spoke with a chap not long ago, he'd been put into prison, but 700 different engagements with agencies across government. And, you know, you could arguably say it's probably 700 failures if the end point is, you know, ending up in the system. So that becomes our task. Are we doing everything that we can to pull the various levers? Are we, as ministers, corralling our agencies to talk more, be more transparent? Have we got the same lines of accountability? And at the fundamental basis of that, are we leaning in to the experiences of those that have to go through the system day in, day out?
Brilliant, thank you.
Well, in terms of improving the justice system works for victims and survivors, and I did want to allow for Minister Sio to pick up on the Te Ao Marama stuff, particularly in the courts, but Te Aorerekura has made it very clear the focus on workforce capability and capacity, and that includes training across the justice system workforce particularly, and that's just to look at one example of where victim survivors have often cited the lack of awareness of the nature of family violence, sexual violence, and how that re-traumatises them when they come face to face with the justice system. And so it's been made very clear in Te Aorerekura to start that work off in terms of improving understanding, particularly across the justice workforce. But I didn't want to pick up on the minister's space on the Te Ao Marama stuff if you wanted to talk on that.
Yeah, this is sort of the next question.
Oh, okay, did I jump ahead?
Real specific question.
Right.
About people describing the system as re-traumatising and needing some really serious improvement. And I'm just wondering if someone, probably you, Minister Sio, wants to talk about what's being done within the justice system to improve it for victims.
Can I give you a long answer?
Yep.
Go on then.
No. I don't say that. No. 2 minutes. You can't say it briefly.
The premise of the question is correct. People do feel that way. And that's because of the nature of the adversarial nature of our justice system. The chief victims advisor also said in her report that we've got to change processes. And so Te Ao Marama was really taking a therapeutic principles that a number of judges had been using, dealing with people with drug addiction, homelessness, people with mental health issues, because jail isn't going to support these and fix the problems, and applying that in the same way with victims. Now, that's work that has started, but we're a long ways away from being perfect. And it is about changing the way the courts look, changing the languages that judiciary and the fraternity of the legal fraternity use, making it safer and simpler. Because often the victims are being re-traumatized because they are the witnesses to something bad that happened to them. And so the judiciary at least are on board that the Te Ao Marama principles of being more sympathetic, more cognizant of the rights of even the rights of victims. We need to be cautious and apply that in a short form, to be a lot more kinder and compassionate about the people that end up in your courtroom. And so that is now being rolled out. It will take time. I'm happy to say that the funding for the first time in this budget, 2022, actually gave the Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Courts, money to implement the changes in the system, procedural changes that will simplify and recognise the rights of victims. But we are nowhere close to finishing that work or getting it right. And I suspect we're always going to trip over each other as we work on this. But the good thing is there is a collective will within the justice sector ministers and also the judiciary system as a whole.
Good to hear that work's underway. Would you like to add to that, Minister?
Yeah, I might just pick up on that. Look, a real good example of, I think, it's a little bit of infrastructural design as well as the approach that Minister Sio just spoke about here in terms of Te Ao Marama. What is that? It's going to look quite different and feel different in different places because that's what our communities need. But one of the issues I was at a court the other day, and I met with a whole range of different people in there who work in this area day in, day out. And they said, look, Minister, here's what we've got. You think about it from a whānau perspective. If we go through an FGC, I can come along, we take the whole whānau, we go through a relatively restorative process where we look each other in the eye. It's about acknowledging the inherent mana of every person at that table, and you work through a process. As soon as we get to the family court process, though, there's a big dog barrier door, the whānau sit outside, the individual victim or that individual walks into that room, they do their thing. I think there's the challenge before us, and I think that we're absolutely up for it. These are systems that have been imported from England, Mairano. We've made small adaptations over the way, but this is the common law system that's been imported into our system. We've made adaptations along the way, but simple things such as the way that we can show up and do things the way that's unique to us. We see where things are working and we see where things are broken. I think so. In terms of the Te Ao Marama approach to the design of the infrastructural design, I was just with a couple of crews up there in Tauranga. This is all the types of things that they were talking about. How do we acknowledge the mana of this person? It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, but as we walk alongside this person, as they enter into that building and take them on a pathway to enlightenment, whoever you are that's stepping into just that physical environment. When I was reading the briefings, I was like, but when I went into there, and I was like, you know, this is okay, you know, bricks and mortar. But actually, you know, walking alongside these people so that we're actually getting, it's a holistic, full approach to every single participant in the system, because, you know, we all also know the other thing, most victims of whānau violence, the trajectory for life can be a whole range of different outcomes, and it's a lot of engagements, multiple engagements through various parts of the justice system. The other thing about Te Marama that I think is really critical, and I just want to acknowledge again the judiciary. Judiciary can do stuff that politicians can't sometimes. They find cool little niches within the law. I won't get into the provisions, but gosh, it's an abstract provision that they use to first initially do some of the work around, like the rangatahi courts, and they've rolled out. It's great. Used to prevent, no, I won't get into that, but it's quite funny. But anyway, you know, these types of processes from the positions that they sit, got to acknowledge, you know, Judge Taumanu, East Coast man, East Coast, Tairāwhiti, Ngāti Porou. But, you know, these guys who have been at the coalface can see day in, day out the trauma and have kind of used whatever levers that they can to shift the system to make it something better. As Minister Sio just said, yep, we've secured the funding. We can bed this stuff into our government's policies so that these are enduring systems, so that, you know, it's almost like we have the opportunity right now to really change the way and test, and we're running trials. I think that's the other probably critical thing, to make sure that they are fit for purpose. But I think we're at a really exciting time right now.
I was going to say, Te Marama sits and was able to emerge because of the Hāpaitia Te Oranga Tangata reform that took place in the previous government. And as I said, it will take time. It isn't all of government approach. For example, in the police, if a woman, a mother or an auntie turned up at the police office needing help, it's also about the police changing the way that they think about these, to not be prosecutorial in their approach, or not to be judgmental, but to accept a person needs help, take it at face value, and also know how to deal with that. And sometimes police are not the best people to provide that, that pastoral care, you know, caring approach to somebody who is desperate.
And sometimes they can be amazing.
Oh, no, I'm not giving police a bad name. None of them I know, but, you know, I'm just saying the approach and the reform that took place under Hāpaitia Te Oranga Tangata is giving life to the kinds of ideas of Te Marama, and recognition that we do need to think more about the victims' rights and figure out how do we provide that, maintaining the dignity or the mana of the victims, but of the system that's trying to provide the support.
And victims, like the rhetoric around victims, I think has been quite exclusionary for so long, right? When I think about victims, I have particular images of people from my own whānau, you know, and they might not live up to all the different types of things that are being portrayed in the media. But the reality is, most of our victims of crime are incredibly vulnerable people that engage with our system far too much. And I think that that's something that I think is a bit of work to be done to break down, and for our systems to respond to actually who's suffering the most at the hands of the system. And it squarely falls within the mahi that our mate here is leading.
I wanted to acknowledge the Victim Survivor Voices, particularly through the Backbone Collective work, the survey that pulled that in specifically for creating Te Aorerekura. And I did just want to let all the participants know that they're actually have been put up on the website, on the Te Puna Aonui website. They've been summarised, all of those diverse voices, for everyone to read, and they're being actively used by the agencies, the Puna Aonui agencies, in the implementation. So I did just want to acknowledge, and that's one example of the very victim survivor focused advocacy work that has to absolutely inform all of our work. And yesterday I acknowledged that also many people who use harm and violence have sometimes been victims themselves, and that's the ongoing nature of trauma. But I also wanted to point out, and again, this work collectively and myself will continue to work with Chief Victims Advisor, because it's there that we heard very clearly that the adversarial justice system, it hasn't brought proper accountability for the harm and violence and abuse that people use. It hasn't brought proper justice and restoration for victims and survivors. And we acknowledge that when there are safety reasons, yes, and victims, and it's important that people sometimes are restrained from being in our community, are made to be away, and that sometimes that's prison. But for the most part, that hasn't always brought accountability in actual fact. So I do want to acknowledge that we'll continue to work with that centering of the full and long experience for victims and survivors, because our system currently has not been set up to enable restoration and healing. And we've got really good research and reports to tell us how to get there.
I'm very aware that you've got to do a runner very shortly, Minister Sepuloni. So I just want to give you one last question.
Yes, thank you.
Why is community leadership important, and how is government going to be working with tangata whenua and other communities to enable their leadership?
Yeah, so I guess that goes back to that relational approach that we were talking about earlier, and the learnings that we take from COVID as well. That relational approach and that social sector commissioning work has been done in consultation with the social sector. We don't have, as Aupito has said and everyone else has said, government doesn't have all of the answers. What we do have is the resourcing. And what we do have are the policy people, and we also have access to a level of data that sometimes is really useful for our sector to help inform our kind of collective work. And so that's what we want to continue to do. And that's certainly our commitment to do that. Yeah.
And part of that was the advisory group. The advisory group
for the social sector
ministerial the ministerial
the tangata whenua.
Yes. Tangata whenua group.
Yes, no, absolutely. And so I mean, I get the sense when I'm out and about, and certainly hope this is the case, but the feedback that I get is really positive with the engagement with our government agencies and our officials, and even from our public servants end. I think that they are enjoying the relationship that they have with community organisations much better when we take on and work in this kind of framework and this kind of model. And so it has to be a continuation of that moving forward. Yeah. We need each other. And our people are better served when community organisations and government agencies are working in sync. And so that's what we want to ensure. And I apologise, I do have to go.
Thank you very much.
I'll let you continue with this talanoa. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Exit stage left.
Aupito's talking to me about a completely different
this is a yes, get up close and do. Family and sexual violence impacts different communities in different ways. We know this. What is being done, Minister Radhakrishnan, to ensure we have good data and that the system actually meets the needs? And you touched on this, Minister Allan, meets the needs of the people.
Yeah, so absolutely right. And I think we're all acutely aware of how family and sexual violence presents differently in different communities, also, with different age groups. Youth experience violence in a way that's different in different settings as well. So bearing all of that in mind, I was really pleased to see, for example, that Te Aorerekura has a significant focus on the fact that one size does not fit all, and that we need to ensure that different communities, and I think data is one part of that, definitely. And I can speak, for example, with ethnic communities, the amount of data that we have at present is low, and that is a gap that we know we need to work on and fill, and there is work underway across agencies to be able to do that. But I believe it goes a lot further than that. It's also about the ways in which different communities and different people within those communities access services as well. So MSD does have a focus on looking at the gaps therein also, and the workforce development that needs to happen in that space so that people can access services in ways that are relevant to them as well. With that culturally appropriate service provision, that is important also. It also goes to the processes that we've been talking about. For example, for some and for many, that process of involving or wrapping around whānau support will work really well, that holistic. For many newer migrants, for example, that doesn't work so well because they don't have the support networks here, and sometimes family is complicit in the abuse as well, and they wouldn't want them at the table. So it's while we're looking through the justice systems and other systems, bearing in mind that there are different things that work for different communities, and that's where community-led solutions. So Carmel spoke about the levers that government has at our disposal, but it's a collective effort, right? Yeah. Because the solutions and the knowledge sits with our communities, and if we don't work with them, we'll be doing it from a very specific point of view in terms of developing these services and the work that government does. So I feel very strongly about that, and I'm pleased to see that focus in Te Aorerekura, and for example in Budget 22. Again, it's also the continuum of service provision, right? From accessing secondary and tertiary services, but primary prevention, and ensuring that we work to change the landscape and strengthen the protective factors within different communities and cultures before we get that. And so I think for the first time, we've got some funding in Budget 22 to look at what that means, for example, for ethnic communities, and that's exciting.
I think the other thing that I'm sure some of our colleagues have gone on, but certainly have been trying to make as many of the mana wahine. There's a kaupapa inquiry at the moment occurring in the Waitangi Tribunal, and these kaupapa inquiry are things I take quite a close, I keep a close eye on because they explore such broad issues. And this mana wahine claim is, I just want to acknowledge too the people that have chosen to take this claim through. I know a lot of my ministerial colleagues have been trying to get down to the hearings to hear directly from our wahine Maori who are subjected to incredibly high rates of violence in the home, and 30%, around about 30% of the claims that are coming through directly relate to sexual and whānau violence that have been experienced. But then kind of taking it back to that historical context, what has been the impacts of colonisation on a system that has broken down whānau. So, and I think, so we're quite fortunate, I think we can say, that people have chosen to share their stories in that forum. We're resourcing it so that we can get really good data into understanding the whole whakapapa of how our wahine have been treated by the systems historically and currently, and whether there are systemic fixes that we need to be focused on that we're not currently doing. So I think that's been an important avenue for us as a government to take heed of as well.
And when the Minister of Finance and I launched a report called the New Zealand Pacific Economy back in 2018. And that report was important because it identified that Pacific peoples contributed $8 billion to New Zealand's economy, despite the inequities and despite the barriers. Now, what that also showed is that there was a lack of data, quality data, specific data for Māori, for Pacifica, and thanks to our researchers out there who do some good work in that space, but it required that government's got to do a lot more in terms of the quality of the data and the analysis of that data by people who have an cultural intelligence that is an added value to how the data is interpreted. But there are a number of other reports right across. Pula Sautu is a report that comes to mind, because when we're talking about family violence and sexual violence, it also means health issues like suicide, mental breakdown, mental health, abortions because of something that occurred with no consent, all of those. Or a dead baby being left under a tree at a park because the mother was, for a number of reasons, didn't feel safe in the family, didn't have the love and the protection of the bugger who got her pregnant. You know, all of these things. And so this government was clear that in terms of our health approach, we had to reform the health system, specifically motivated by addressing those inequities for Māori, for Pacifica, for people with disabilities, all the minority groups, those, and that work has started. But what's also brought to the surface on it, we needed a different approach. So the Māori Health Authority is a different approach to this, is a targeted approach. What Cabinet agreed upon was for a dedicated, beefed up leadership role around Pacifica lens from the top all the way through the bottom, a dedicated Ola Manuia Pacific Health and Wellbeing strategy right across, led by people. When we're talking about inequities, we're also talking about the inequities around the lack of cultural intelligence and understanding of culture and the languages that people in the communities use. Because if you don't understand that, you're not going to be able to empathize and understand the context of the challenges, particularly in family situations. And so, again, it's reform that is underway. Workforce development seems to me be a need right across the whole system. And in particular, having good people that really understand the importance of this work and understand the need for empathy, kindness, and compassion, and in that sense, but also understand how the system ought to be navigated. Because most times we just don't know. And so, again, it's one of these big challenges. Now, here's what our listeners need to really, really know. These reforms, motivated by what the community have asked for, require ongoing, consistent, long-term investment. And when they hear politicians says, we're going to cut taxes, do this, do that, our listeners really need to be thinking about, is that feasible at all? I'm saying to you, us here ministers, committed to the kaupapa here, recognize how hard it is, and we have to think long term, not just about this budget and this year. We have to think long term, and that's what we're collectively, united around. We're collectively united around also the greater collaboration in all of these things, because the siloed operations of agencies of the past just does not help address these complex issues.
Yeah,
Totally agree on that. And we've got a 25-year strategy.
Yeah,
we should actually have a 25-year investment plan. Don't know how feasible that is.
No, I can talk to that. We're absolutely, so I've got the first components of that investment plan due in the next year, I think. And so an investment plan to be able to give us the guidance of how we want to make sure that we are resourcing what we're committing to. So we're going to have short, medium and long-term strategies around absolutely an investment plan for Te Aorerekura, 25 years. And of course, a plan that's going to be able to evolve and respond. Hopefully, as we put down the good roots of this work, that will also indicate where the investments need to lie ahead. And I wanted to give that assurance because there are so many gaps. We are definitely not going to solve them in 1, 2, or even 5 budgets, but we have to be able to give people confidence that we've got an overview across the system of what needs to work. I've been very clear with Aupito that I am not satisfied that we have strengthened our approach and work with Pacifica specific strategies, and so that I want to pick that up better. So I'm aware that there are, our disabled people, young people, rainbow, ethnic people, women, older people. I am aware that we have been neglecting for generations so many people in this space. And I'm aware that we're not going to pick them all up immediately. And that breaks my heart because all of us want that to be done overnight. but I am very clear that we have got the long-term and collaborative thinking to allow us to sequence those and pick them up as best we can with the advice of working with our communities.
And I think what we're doing here also is to give confidence to organisations on the ground. You know, Women's Refuge in the Pacifica, Leba, Pacifica, and mental health providers, as few as they are, because those are the people at the front line dealing with this at the coalface. So all of this that Aorerekura is doing is really enabling that. But as you say, if it's 25-year strategy, then our discussions constantly is about, and the Minister of Finance made this absolutely clear at the beginning, 2018, first wellbeing budget, it's not just about this year and the 3-year term, it's also about outer years.
Thank you. We're getting very, very close to out of time, but there's one that I'd like everybody to give a little brief answer to. What is it about this kaupapa, about Te Aorerekura, that gives you the greatest hope that we can make a difference? And we'll start over here with Minister Radhakrishnan.
Thanks, Ange. And can I just also take this opportunity to thank everyone, many who are watching today are from the sector, if not all, and many are working at the coalface. Just to say a huge thank you, particularly given also the challenges of COVID-19. Mine is really simple. I'm just extraordinarily pleased that we finally have a long-term vision, a plan that sets out what we want to achieve, how we want to achieve it, one that takes into account the diversity that exists across Aotearoa. And most importantly, we've in the sector, I remember the days when we were banging our heads against the wall to try and get a government that actually listened to the sector. And I'm incredibly pleased that we have that now and leadership therein.
Thanks. Mr. Allan, what gives you hope?
Well, actually, this kāhui of people give me hope. This, I want to puff our chests, but a government that listens to our whānau who are at the coalface day in and day out. And I can see the blood, sweat and tears that's gone in from, our colleagues from our whānau who have been the recipients of probably a system that hasn't listened for a very long time. We've seen the whole system creaking. And so what I can see, what gives me hope, one, it's not just listening, but listening's the first step. But secondly, is the cladding, the cladding of the house to make sure that we've got strong foundations that we're building upon. So that's through the resourcing, that's through the policy redesign, and that's through a government as well that's forcing itself, despite our silos that we all like to operate in, through a whole range of different tools, forcing itself to have to work together, because the only people that matter at the end of the day are our whānau that are caught up in this system, and we've got to be doing things different. So,
Kia ora. What gives me hope is what I've seen over this past 2 days on this incredible hui that had over 900 registrations as of yesterday. And for the first time, I feel we've been able to pull together people, and with the help of technology, government, community, tangata whenua, sector, a range of diverse groups and voices to actually challenge us, but also be really energised about an opportunity to work together in a long-term way with immediate changes also to resolve this. And that's because Te Aorerekura really does belong to the people. And I'm pleased about that. And Emma said this morning, this doesn't even belong to any one government. It's 25 years minimum long. It needs to be protected and nurtured by communities who will basically say, no matter who and what is in government, no matter what minister is or isn't here, don't you dare water it down. Don't you dare lift the pedal off. Don't you dare think about taking a back step with Te Aorerekura. And I'm already seeing that. I'm already seeing the communities in the sector own this strategy, guard it, and want to make it better and stronger every single day. So that gives me huge hope.
Cool, thank you. Last word.
It's just hope for change, for something better. I think Minister Allan said made reference to mana. You know, for somebody whose mana has been lost, destroyed, or sullied, it's about hope that we can restore their mana. And my experience in my own family across the world, but in listening to victims, that's what they need, is hope that something better will be done for them in the restoration of mana and dignity as people's human beings. And I think it's also hope for offenders and perpetrators that they can change.
Thank you very much, all you amazing people. I'm optimistic, hopeful that this kaupapa will actually result in some change. 25 years is a long time. We've got plenty to do in that time. So
thank you.
And I think that's it for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Tēnā Ange, I te Aorerekura, I te rangatira, tēnā koe, utira ki ngā minita katoa, koutou te muramura o te ahi, tēnā koutou katoa, kia kaha, kia maia, kia manawa nui. E te iwi, if you have any questions for our community panel that will be coming up this afternoon, focused on disability and Pacifica peoples, please write your questions in the chat so we can feed them through this afternoon.